I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Today, I have Erin Nichole. She is the designer behind Mija Handmade. I love her stuff. And I mentioned this in the episode, but I just have to say it again. The first time I just saw Erin from a distance, she was carrying this giant tote bag that she had made entirely out of selvages, and I died. I was just in love immediately. And then I got to meet her and talk to her, and I was like, okay, I love this woman. So anyway, um, she started a really cool block of the month this year called Learning Curves, and it's all different types of curved blocks. So cool. That's still available. So if you haven't checked that out, go see it. It's like a skill builder series where each block approaches a different type of curve template, and they all interact differently. She also has a new quilt that she just released based on one of those quilt blocks called Grandma Core, and it is just so cute. So go check that out while you're listening, and let's hear from Erin. Hey, y'all. I'm here to get you on this cozy earth train with me. I am still in love with my luxurious bamboo sheet set, and now I'm head over heels in love with the bamboo pajama set. I'm going to be real with you. I really struggle to find pajamas that fit. It's such a frustrating process. The legs are never long enough, sleeves are never long enough on the tops, and I just get frustrated because I just want to be cozy. So when I saw that I was able to order a tall in these Cozy Earth pajamas, I was floored. I was hoping for the best, and you know what? My expectations were exceeded. Not only are the pants plenty long enough, the sleeves are plenty long enough, and they fit my body so great. The pajamas are crafted with a stretch knit, so they stay comfortable and have a beautiful drape. And the breathability of the fabric keeps your temperature regulated, so you're not ever too hot or too cold. Putting these pajamas on was like a Christmas miracle. So if you're looking for the perfect gift for that someone in your life that just has everything, or you want to give yourself the gift of comfort this holiday season, look no further than Cozy Earth. Go to cozyearth.com and use code GRANNYS, that's GRANNYS, at checkout to receive 40% off. Upgrade your nights and transform your days with Cozy Earth. The link is in the show notes. And now onto the episode. Hi, Erin. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm so happy we're getting to do this.
Yes, I'm very excited. I'm very excited.
This is so good. So good. Well, first, I just have to say, when I very first saw you, like just saw you, and I didn't even meet you yet, we were at the Denver airport on our way to QuiltCon, and you had your selvage bag, and I was like, I'm in love. I don't even need to know any more about her. I'm in love.
She must be a quilter.
Mhm. Yeah. So that was my first introduction to you. And then somebody's like, oh, that's Mija Handmade. And I was like, who's that? So I was like, of course, on Instagram, like everybody at QuiltCon, like I gotta follow all these people now. So, and it's been a love affair ever since. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, let's get into it. Like, how did you even get quilting? How did you get started sewing?
Okay, so I grew up like under my mother's sewing table. Ooh, that's a good book title or something.
Yeah.
Sewing table. So she made costumes and like special occasion outfits for me. I have very strong memories of like a piano recital outfit that she made that, had that. I'm sure actually that it was quilting cotton with just like florals and trumpets and like ivy prints all over it. Um, and I have very strong memories of falling asleep under the sewing table while she panic sewed like we all do,
Right.
at 10 p.m. at night the day before something has to be done. Um, and I would go to take a nap under the table and she would wake me up and I would just be like a zombie with her pinning things on me. So there's something very comforting about being around a sewing machine. Um And I have not gotten into garment sewing, but like a lot of people, my brother had a daughter and I wanted to make her something. So I said, I might not remember how to use a sewing machine, but like there's enough there maybe that I can figure it out.
Yeah.
I made her a couple baby quilts, I want to say in like 2011, maybe, and then did not pick up quilting again until the pandemic. And
Mm,
when I was stuck in my house, I didn't have anything else to do except return to some old interests, and quilting was the one that stuck.
yeah. Yeah. That that lockdown did wonders for the quilting community.
Right? Right? Just huge, huge.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so fun. Yeah, I also grew up with my mom sewing and sewing costumes and sewing just whatever, curtains and bedding and just anything. I was like, I want you to make this. And she'd be like, okay.
We had in high school, my best friends, we had a yoga themed dance, and my mom made the six of us um costumes for that, like black yoga outfits. I think it was like, again, quilting cotton, black fabric with rainbow colored stars all over it.
Mm,
Um and I think that's the last costume or like outfit she might have made for me. But like how generous of her time that she made, I mean, togas, not yoga, toga. Oh my gosh, I've been saying it. Toga.
Olga.
Uh,
Okay.
that makes more sense. She made togas for all of us. And like what a wonderful way to spend time, for your teenage daughter than just making little togas for all her friends.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so fun. Like I have some formal dresses that my mom made for me and just that time and attention is just like felt so special because I got to have the exact dress I wanted and the exact colors I wanted and like it fit my body because like also bodies are all different. So buying from the store is so frustrating sometimes, but just those times were special when it was like making something for me that is tailored to me that my mom was putting time and attention into. So I totally get that. Like just that feeling of it's a caring feeling because it's like anytime something's made for you, you're like, oh my gosh, because you know. Yeah, thank you so much.
We put feeling into our quilts, with like that's a bit of like love in ourselves that we can give to other people.
Yeah, exactly. So during the spicy times of the lockdown, um, what like what did you start with? Did you just like was there a pattern that grabbed you, or were you like, I'm just gonna start sewing shit together?
I just started sewing stuff. Actually, let me disappear for 2 seconds. I started making like little zipper bags.
Cute.
I know. I forget if there was like somebody that was making lots of just like striped textiles that I really liked. And so
Mm-hmm.
I really just had panels and panels of like stripped piece fabric essentially, and I didn't know what to do. So I went to Joann's, or probably ordered them online at that point, but I bought a bunch of zippers. And
Mm-hmm.
I can turn these into zipper pouches. What else am I doing? And then all of a sudden I had 30 zipper pouches. What am I going to do with those? So if you scroll all the way back to the beginning of my Instagram page, I think those are like the first pictures I had. I told my private, like my personal Instagram account, like, hey friends, I'm going to be selling these. I don't want to spam you, so I'm going to put them over here.
Yeah.
Over there.
Wow. That's so fun. So how did like that jump to quilting for you?
I didn't like turning these into pouches. I liked the piecing that went into this part.
Hmm.
Um, And I think I got served a couple accounts that were either like really into pattern testing or a couple pattern writers that were looking for testers. And I think I made one quilt from a pattern and then immediately jumped into, I tried pattern testing for a couple folks and thought, I can write a pattern. Like,
Sure.
I, that kind of figure it out yourself gene.
Hmm.
has never expressed itself in me a ton before quilting, but as I was pattern testing, that's when I was really like, I can do this. And then I just wrote my first pattern.
Wow, fun. And like I think and you can like stop me if I'm wrong, but I just feel like having a crafty parent around or like crafty caretaker in your childhood, like I think it kind of instills that in you because like I have that too. It didn't really crop up. Like I don't write my patterns, but I was like, I can start a quilting business. Like I can crochet anything I want to crochet. Like I just have this like I get these ideas and then I just want to figure out how to do it. But I think it comes from like I watched my mom just like make stuff all the time. And my dad would make stuff out of wood and like, fix things around the house. And I'd be like, I can do anything I want to do. So it's just funny like what awakens that in you because it's there, right?
Very much so. I can figure it out. I can do it.
Yeah. And was your first quilt, was it the curves that you're kind of known for now, or was it more
No,
straightforward piecing?
it's much more straightforward piecing. I don't have an example of it easily in reach, but it's the Sharrow quilt, Sharrow, and it is flying geese and some strip piecing.
Oh,
Mm. Yeah, I think
nice.
it was like a nice first pattern to kind of, flex those muscles a bit, figure out because there's so much to pattern writing that isn't designing the quilt. I think
Mhm.
lots of people can design their own quilts. Lots of people can imagine up something that they want to see in fabric and on a quilt top. Pattern writing is a different art. Can you take the idea in your head and translate it so concisely that tens of other people, can make it?
Yeah.
Um, and that is almost as fun to me as designing the quilt pattern or the designing the quilt top.
Hmm.
Those are kind of like two different muscles that I enjoy flexing for this small business of mine.
Yeah. How fun. Yeah, I think sometimes that technical side of things is what scares people away. I know it's kind of what keeps me away, all the quilt math, but like I just like to enjoy other people's patterns and the fruits of other people's labor of doing that because then I can make the quilt that they've designed and I don't have to think about it. But um, is it like, is because you've got a day job like most people, is that something you get to do in your day job or is it like a wholly separate thing? Or are there like bits of your quilting business that mirror what you get to do on a daily basis?
My day job is very process oriented, so that piece
Mm,
kind of translates of there's a lot of steps that I have to follow to make sure that the work gets done. And it's similar in that in quilting, there are a lot of steps you have to follow to make sure that the quilt top comes out correctly.
yeah.
Um, uh, I'm a researcher in my day job, so it's a bit more like inquisitive, but similarly like here's a problem that needs to be solved and how creative can we be to get
Mm,
to the end result. So in quilt pattern writing, how um how concise can I be when trying to write all the directions? I think an underrated aspect of pattern writing is how efficient, I shouldn't say efficient, like you as a quilt pattern writer, how do you like to cut your fabric? Like, I don't think
mhm.
a lot of people think about that when they're making a quilt pattern of they just say, oh, here's a width of fabric strip that I need to subcut into a bunch of pieces. The designer is sitting here thinking, I could cut out, 5x2 size units, or I could cut out 2x5 inch size units. And what makes the most sense for fabric efficiency, for how prints might turn out, for what it means to cut out all of the pieces together, like what makes the most sense, what feels the most enjoyable, like that
Mhm.
is part of that problem solving that I enjoy in the kind of like back end of pattern writing. It's almost like once I've written the pattern and made one version of a pattern, I'm over it. Like I still
Mhm.
market it and share it with everybody, but in my head, I'm like, I've done it.
Yeah. You're like, check, next thing.
I like it, but I'm already moved on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's funny too, because it's like when you're finally releasing your pattern and marketing it and showing people, it's like you've already spent a gazillion hours with it. You've been looking at it for a long time. You've been fiddling with it for a long time. So like I can only imagine by the time you get to that, because like I start to feel that when I'm making a quilt, if it's taking too long and I've been making the blocks forever, and I'm like, oh, if I have to look at this one more time, and it's like I love the end result.
And it's just, it takes a while to get there. And marketing is like should be the icing on the cake. Like now I finally get to share it. Like there is a little bit of that excitement. Now I finally get to share it, but it's also like I'm not done with this quilt yet.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And
But
I'm normally fiddling with the pattern like right up until release. So it's not like I've had time to step away from it and
mhm,
get to enjoy returning to it. It's like push, 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 push right up until release.
yeah,
And then through release too, because you can't just say, hey, it's available and expect, the world to find it.
mhm, yeah, yeah. It's hard because you have to keep putting it out there because it's especially with how we have to run small business through social media. Like that's how it gets attention, and it's so noisy and chaotic that it's like you have to put it out there more than just once or nobody's going to see it kind of thing.
Oh.
Even your own followers might not see it for a few days and then it's like, well, nobody liked my pattern. It's like, no, they just haven't seen it yet.
For the pattern designers who do this full time, I'm always in such awe when I see them making another version of a quilt pattern they wrote, 3 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
one, it's amazing that you have time to like return to this. Two, it's amazing that you have the energy to return to that pattern. Like, I, I don't want to see it ever again. I'm over it.
Yeah. You're like, how do you do it?
Hopefully I'll get to a place where I have that kind of like time and energy to devote to all of my quilts, well, all of my quilt patterns. But right now it's very much just like what's in front of me. That's the most fascinating thing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, when you have to split your time, I'm sure it's like, for me at least, like if I could spend all my time like barreling forward on this podcast, like things would be so different, I think. Like I'd have a lot more followers, I'd have more sponsorship. It's like there's so many things like in my head, like if I could only, but like I also run my quilting business. So it's like I split my time and same thing with that. Like if I just only focused on that and didn't do the podcast, like I'm sure things would be different. But it's like
We're human. We
we're
need
human.
different outlets. We need
Yeah.
rest. We can't just be pushing all the time.
Right. Right. And I think that's like one thing that as a small business owner, I can kind of get caught up in the mindset of like, oh, I need to quit resting so much and I need to put more. And I'm like, no, but when I don't rest very much, then I get into like functional freeze from just doing stuff, but I'm not like really making any progress, or I get in actual freeze mode and I just can't do anything. So it's like those resting times are important. And I think acknowledging like, okay, I need some time to rest, or like I really want to put more focus in this, so I need to work a little harder over here so that I can focus more on whatever. So it's like when you've got this amazing like day self, your day job self, where you get to go do this really cool like researching, that sounds so fun. Like what a good time. But then also that kind of that pull of like, well, I really want to keep working on this quilt and play with it. It's like
Yeah.
it's it's an ebb and flow. It's a push and pull. You have to kind of find where you're, sometimes you've got more energy and sometimes you don't, and just ride those waves, because it's like you can try to be consistent, but I feel like it also, that consistency also needs a break sometimes too.
It's like two warring halves of your brain of like what are you feeding because it provides for you, and what are you feeding because it provides for your like creative nurtured self.
Mhm.
And then still rest has to fit in there somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard making a business out of your passion hobby. Because
Mhm.
I sew for pleasure still, but my pleasure is my quilt patterns. So it's been a really long time since I've made somebody else's pattern,
Mhm.
since I've sewn something that was not a quilt pattern that I was about to market, or like just to have something around. My in-laws were in town the other day, and oh, I have to replace some outdoor cushions, cushion covers for our patio furniture. And my father,
Mhm.
well, why didn't you just sew that yourself? And I was like, sir, if I'm sewing, it is because it's something that's going to bring me some income.
Mhm.
I don't sew I don't sew just because anymore. And that was really hard for me. Like it was my immediate, I just said that. And then I had to reflect on that. Like, I don't sew unless it brings in money. Oh my gosh.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's a change. That's a real
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find like if you do happen to be sewing something just for fun, like just for yourself, like is there guilt there?
no, it's more like I don't here. Let's say this. I'm still not sure what my like one sentence blurb is about my quilt pattern style. And I think that's because I'm very exploratory in the patterns that I write. So I'm obsessed with curves right now. And the way to sew something for pleasure and meet my business goals
Mhm.
is to design towards my interest.
Mhm.
Whatever pattern I'm releasing right now, you know, there was like a 3-month period where I was obsessed with that technique. And so, in order to monetize that pleasure, I made the next pattern about it. So that's where I've found that kind of middle road. So I'm not releasing, quilt patterns once a quarter. I'm trying to get my second one out the door this year, and the amount of work that takes is enormous.
Mhm.
So trying to find that balance of chasing down my interests while aligning that with like trying to drive some sales and get people some interesting patterns with like novel designs and things. Like that's where I've found that kind of graceful middle road of sewing for pleasure yet still moving forward my business.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a fine balance. It's just so crazy. Like I did find myself because I joined the um Knot and Thread, mini duff or the duffel sew along because I was like, I'm just gonna get it done. I have the pattern, I have everything I need. I just need to do it. All I've done is cut out the pocket and zipper bindings. That's it. That's all I've done. And I'm like, oh my God. But I found myself feeling guilty for taking time at like 9 o'clock at night to do that for myself, even though I spent all day sewing and quilting for other people, which is my job, right? Which is fine because I made that job for myself because I wanted to. But like, I still have to get to a place where I don't feel guilty for making the things. And honestly, when I make stuff for myself, it's because I'm trying a new skill or I want to make something I've never made before. Like, so it almost does feed my business skills because then I'm like learning new things and new techniques and ways to like navigate patterns and fabric and all the things. So I guess if I look at it that way, it helps. But at the same time, I'm like, but what else am I giving up on? But I'm like, but this is my hobby. It's not just my business. It's a mind boggling situation to be in sometimes.
It's a real commitment for folks who think they want to start, writing their own quilt patterns or start a long arming business or anything. Those are just like new lines that they'll have to tread. Is that a phrase? I don't know.
Sure.
Lines of like relearning how to navigate those boundaries for themselves. If you turn your restful activity into a business, you're going to have to find new ways to rest.
Mhm.
That means new ways to rest doing the same thing. That's wonderful. But new ways to rest could also mean like stepping away from your sewing machine and finding something else.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's tricky, but I think it's different for everybody, right? Like you found a way to marry those two and you're still working on that, which is great. I'm so happy for you because for some of us it's a little different and it's harder, but I think like you said, if you're mindful about it, like and take the time to kind of think about that and reflect on your values within all of that, like I think we can get there
Yeah.
as boss babes.
Yeah. Yeah. So finding ways to like track down your interests or to follow whatever scent it is that's like intriguing to you at the moment. I think that's how I approach my pattern design is like what do I want to work on at the moment? What can make me feel good? What can feel pleasurable sewing? Then let's turn that into a pattern somehow. Then let's turn that into income somehow.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
That's how the
Um,
that's how the
yeah.
learning curves block of the month started. I was terrified of curves and I thought I have to face that fear. That's got to change.
Yeah.
So I felt so limited in the kind of quilts I could sew and design like patterns that I could write.
Mhm.
Um, so I spent a whole year writing block patterns because I didn't want to commit to that's I think a fear for folks with whatever new skill they want to learn. Committing to a whole quilt top of a new skill sounds intimidating.
Mhm.
So for me it was how do I write how what can I do with a block pattern, a block that is not so intimidating.
Yeah.
It is more like biting off what you can chew without the commitment of now I've got 3.5 yards of all this fabric and it has to turn into this because I've already cut it up.
Right. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, like, where did the obsession with curves come from? And I love to see it because I used to be like, I'm never sewing curves, but I did one quilt for my husband's dad and like his wife. And it was the art gallery, like the mountain scene with like the sun in the background. And that was the first curves I ever sewed. And I was terrified. And to be fair, art gallery isn't maybe the best to sew curves with because it doesn't have as much stretch and it still worked out just fine. But that was scary. And now I've just made recently the avant-garde quilt by Holly Clark. She's got like it's really cute. It's like built in kind of a triangular structure, but then when you put it all together, it makes these like these flowers. It's so cute, but it's all curves. And I just finished that for a client because she wanted it. And I was like, well, here we go. We're just gonna dive in. And like I've done curves in between, but yeah, it can be very daunting and scary. So the fact that you were just like, we're going head first, baby, is like that's admirable to me because some people just shy away from things forever because they're scared of them. And I think
I once I don't know, not everybody is like this. But once I make a decision, like there's no I'm not undoing the decision. Even if it's wrong, I'm like, oh, okay. My brain is already set on this course. There's no and that's what happened with curves of like I just want to get better at them because they make such pretty quilt patterns.
they do.
Opens up like with every new skill, it opens up like a whole new world of design and like beautiful things that you can make. Um, you just have to play with them one and play around with enough of them that you find the new scary technique that makes sense to you, right? That
Mhm.
you enjoy doing. So with the learning curves block of the month, one of the what I knew from the beginning that what I wanted to do was make every pattern use a slightly different curved template because everybody writes their quilt patterns differently. So
Mhm.
some curved templates have registration marks, some don't. Some curve patterns you trim from all four sides once to like square up a quarter circle curve. Some you just trim from two sides. Um, s- the so the what I wanted to make sure happened was that once I was done experimenting and writing all the patterns, anybody who wanted to join me on that journey would have exposure to enough different templates that they felt prepared to take on a full quilt pattern because they would have tried that template pattern already. They would have tried that kind of curve, probably not in the same size, but they
Right.
have experience with that and hopefully have built up some confidence around it.
Yeah. That's exciting and so thoughtful of you too to like not only just learn it for yourself, but to try to help other people expose themselves to different styles of curves. Because you're right, there's so many different ways to approach it and so many different ways of trimming and like manipulating the pieces to go together. And um, so that's really cool. Thank you for thinking of your makers.
Well, it's part of the experience. You want people to have a good time. You want them to learn skills from your patterns. And if you just wrote the same in a block of the month scenario, quilt pattern's different, but in a block of the month scenario, if you just wrote the same quarter circle curve template over and over again, that gets boring after a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause then you're just like, I'm making the same thing. I already done this 1,000 times. Like, what else is new? You know? That's
Mhm.
so cool. So for the block of the month, can people still join, like even though it's well underway? And is it something they can get even when you're finished with it? Like,
Yes, folks can still join. Whenever folks join, they get immediate access to all of the released patterns. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it in 2025, honestly. Some folks have asked if like singular block patterns will be made available. Um, I think I might make them available in like packages of 3 or 4.
mm,
Um, because it's for the same experience of like you want exposure to lots of different blocks, exposure to lots of different templates. Like I do want to keep that experience part of the making
mhm,
of the block pattern. But I haven't I'm running into like technical limitations on my website of how to list things like that. So plus trying to get ready for a 2025 block of the month idea.
mhm.
We're just prioritizing where we're spending our energy, and I just haven't answered that question yet.
Okay. So we can just like watch and wait and see what happens. But that's good to know. So people can still join, get what's already been released, and then be on the ride for the upcoming blocks for 2024. And then we'll just see what happens in 25.
Mhm.
And then you have, so is Grandma Core part of that, or is it its own?
Or actually, it's hard, it's low contrast here. So that quilt pattern releasing October 21st, I think is the date I picked for that. Um, Grew out of it's the very first block pattern of learning curves. It's the Roxy Wave quilt block. Um, that one I just had so much fun making and wanted to see what would happen if we turned it into a full quilt pattern. Um, so these are, small business decisions that I'm thinking of, like, do I take value away from the learning curves members by turning one of the blocks into a full pattern? We'll find out. We'll find
Yeah.
out. Because if you really wanted to make grandma core with the block pattern you already have as a learning curve member, you can. It's all figure outable. Um, but I just had so much fun with that one particular block that it made sense to just turn it into a full pattern. And one of the things that I'm actually really proud of this pattern is that it accounts for two-way directional fabric.
Mm,
I just barely see that all of these stripes are running in the same direction
yeah.
across this. So
Oh,
this is the wall hanging size, just
okay.
24. Um, and I really want it was actually in this test version where I realized I can make directional fabric work. Hold on, let me pause on sewing and let me tweak the instructions a little bit, and we figured it out. That was pretty fun. I'm excited.
That's exciting. Because it's hard, like, especially when you have a directional fabric and you want to use it, but then you're like, ah, but if it goes into that pattern, then it's going to get all wonky. And so I appreciate when pattern writers, because it's not the pattern that did it, but the pattern writers who take the time to kind of figure that out for people, because some of us don't think that way, or we're not spatially in that space to like figure that out for ourselves. And so having that kind of built into the pattern is really nice, so convenient, and takes kind of that stress out, because that's one of the things that stresses me out about like sawtooth stars too, is like trying to figure out how to make the fabric go the right direction when I'm making the flying geese, and it's stressful, but especially in curves.
It's only us who put the stress on us, but we want it to look nice. We're putting all the time and effort into it. We want it to look nice on the other end of it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it would be fine either way, but I think, yeah, like if I'm going to take the time to make this, I want it to be fully aesthetically the thing that I want to see. So makes sense to add that in.
Yeah,
How fun.
I'm super excited. Not, it doesn't take into account one-way directional fabrics, because then the pattern would be like 20 pages of instruction.
Mhm.
And it would be almost impossible to follow because you'd have 16 pieces that you have to use in one particular spot in the block.
Mm,
It'd be rough.
yeah. I guess if people really wanted to go that extra mile, they could, but
Mhm.
you know, teach their own, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Once you share your pattern and people make it, then it's kind of their thing, right? It's not yours anymore.
I think part of the beauty of quilt pattern writing is it is a shared experience. Like, I've given you everything you need to do to make this. If you want to make that, make it. And then, like, how cool that both of our brains worked together to turn that out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting to see it. And I love seeing like all different versions of the, you know, quilt patterns that I admire, and then seeing the ways that other people work with them. And like you, I did some pattern testing kind of earlier in my quilty time and during the pandemic, and just seeing other people's visions for, we're all making the same quilt, but just like different people's visions of how it comes together and color usage and design. I'm just like, holy cow, we all made like such different quilts, even though we're following the same pattern. So,
I think I've moved away from using pattern testers, but there's a lot of reasons I have, but one of the big regrets for me is like I don't get to see that in the like early stages of the quilt pattern writing process. Of I don't get to see testers like different versions of how they imagine that pattern coming to life. And it is a big sadness for me that I've cut that out of the pattern release experience. But I think for um the business decisions I've made, it makes sense to move away from uh pattern testers for full quilts. That's a huge time commitment. For the learning curves block of the month, I did have pattern testers, and the expectation was just that they'd make one block. I bought their fabric. They got free access to the learning curves block of the month. And then there was no marketing requirement for them. I just needed a picture. So
yeah,
use the content to share. And it just seemed like a one block commitment is much different than a full quilt top commitment.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I stepped away from testing because I was like, it was taking me too long, and like I was neglecting my business or neglecting the testing because of the business. And it was just like, something has to give, and I'm not making money from testing patterns as much as I loved it. And I did it all for Katerina Rochella, and I freaking love her. So I don't regret it, but I am like, yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, a full quilt is a huge commitment. And she was so kind. Like, if you just do a block, that's fine. If you just do the baby version, that's fine, whatever. She was so accommodating, but that discernment too of like, especially as a business decision to say, I'm not going to use testers for full quilts. Like, I'm sure there was a lot of thought behind that and a lot of reasons. And you don't have to explain any of it if you're not comfortable, but
Well, part of it, a big part of it was I felt like I was taking advantage of quilters
Mm,
because I want to compensate them fairly for their time,
mhm,
and I want their skills to be valued. So if I'm asking them to give me their time and materials,
mhm,
there's how could I possibly expect like a larger cultural high value assignment? That's not a sentence. How could I expect people to value their labor if I was expecting it for free?
mhm.
Yeah. Um,
Sure.
so the goal is to uh, the big dream is to do this full time, right? That would take a lot of work.
Mhm,
And under those circumstances, if I was pulling in enough income to support that, part of the business plan would also be to have some sort of revenue stream to pay pattern testers. Because it is so exciting to see what they do with your pattern, and it does help other quilters have a vision for what they might want to do.
mhm,
Mock-ups don't seem to have the same sort of like spark the same sort of, ooh, I want to make that. So to have
mhm.
another person's vision is valuable. And I would love to be able to compensate somebody to do that eventually. That's the plan. Just gotta wait for the money to come in. Ugh.
Right.
Mhm.
I know. I know. That's kind of the bummer side of small businesses is like I think there's just this perception that if you're putting patterns out or if you're like turning out all these quilts, like then you must be making so much money. But it's like, I mean, not really. It's expensive to run a business. And then to turn around and if you want to pay somebody fairly to do the work of making a whole quilt,
Mhm.
like where's that money going to come from? Are you going to just like go broke because you want to pay somebody fairly, or are you going to just like be okay with you being the one that makes your samples and like and the block, I think like that's more accessible. You can purchase like a half a yard's worth of fabric for somebody to make one quilt block out of more easily than you can pay somebody, you know, whatever a fair wage would be to have them make a quilt. And everybody charges differently, and that's a whole separate conversation. um, but yeah, it's a tricky spot for sure.
I kept track of how long it took me to make a quilt top a couple years ago. And after factoring in like a living wage for my time, not just like $10 an hour for sewing, but like this is what it costs to live in my city, it was it was a couple grand
Hmm.
just for piecing the quilt top.
Hmm.
I can't
Yeah,
pay I can't pay myself that.
no, it's wild, and like people don't understand it, and I like, and it's fine. They don't have to understand it, but at the
Yeah,
same time,
these are just the decisions I'm making for my business and
mm,
it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
yeah, for sure. And for everybody's going to be different, but I think also because there's a variance in the value we place on um making quilts. I mean, just you know, very specifically, like what I charge seems astronomical to some people, but what they charge, I'm like, you're joking, right? Like that's all you're charging. So it's a hard conversation to have, especially when people want something and then they say, well, can you do it? Like, I don't have that much. I'm like, well, then I can't do it for you, you know, like, but if we don't start valuing ourselves more highly and expecting that to be returned to us as makers and designers, and like you're putting hours and hours of time and effort into these things, like, then people won't meet us. Like if we keep lowering the bar and saying, okay, well, I'll budge and I'll only charge $10 an hour. Like, no, you can't live off of that. That's not fair, because then the next person's going to expect that from somebody else who isn't going to charge that. And then those people, you know, it's just like perpetuates this idea that like women's work isn't as valuable.
And one of the things I value about my quilt patterns is like they don't look like anything else out there.
Hmm.
And I'm very intentional about that. Um, so how can so when I work with pattern testers, I'm asking them to make something very unique and like a new technique. And it's not as simple as stitching up a couple HSTs or flying geese.
Hmm.
So if I'm going to invest all that time and effort into making the design unique, I'm also expecting them to invest a lot of time and effort into making something that's unique. And I want that to be valued all around.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is, it's special because you are making something that lives inside of you and you want to share it with other people. And it is unique. It doesn't look like anybody else's. And so you get to have that kind of niche in the world of quilting where you're like, this is mine and this is what I want to share with you. Now go make it yours, but also compensate me.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yeah, that's it's
It's a
still
line
a
we
fight. What
all,
were you gonna say?
it's a line that we all walk of as consumers paying for novelty and skill. Because this is not a new conversation, but like there's a lot of effort I put into designing curve templates that are high quality, accounting for cutting directions for directional fabric. Is that the same value as an HST pattern where it's just like make 150 HSTs and stitch them up? There are places for both of those patterns.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of consumers expect the value to be the same for those. And as a designer, I'm saying, no, the value is not the same. Like this took months to perfect the things that make it uniquely mine.
Hmm.
You can go online and find instructions for how to make HSTs on your own. So the effort I would put into a more straightforward sawtooth star pattern, I would
Hmm.
charge less for that pattern than I would charge for a pattern that I've put all essentially R&D, right? That I've put all
Hmm.
time into to make sure that it's unique and works correctly.
Yeah. And when it has more technical skills in it, you have to do that work. Otherwise, you end up with a whole mess and then people get mad because they can't make your pattern work. And so you're right. I think that that variance in value of how much work goes into the design itself, like that also has to be accounted for. And especially like with curves, like you have to have templates. And as the designer, it's your responsibility to make sure that your makers are getting the right templates that, obviously they're printable, but like, and I do like to see that people are getting like acrylic templates made for their curve quilts because it is a big investment when you're doing an entire quilt out of curves to then have something out of flimsy cardboard that's going to break down and like not be the same for every single piece. And it is another investment, right? It's like, how invested are you in making this pattern? And like, it's highly valuable to you as the designer because you put in all that time and effort and you're trying to make it easier, like more palatable to the makers. So you've gone through all the troubles of figuring all the problem spots out. And it's like, yeah, it's like you said, it's not a new conversation, but it's still there.
Think it's hard for consumers to see that, right?
Yeah.
So if you go to my website, if you go to my shop, I have patterns listed at a variety of prices. And I'm not always sure that the quilter who wants one of my patterns understands why. But it's also weird to have a little pop-up like, hey, if you want a cheap pattern, get this one. If you like my design and want to learn the techniques that I like to use, get this one, but it'll cost a little more. Like that's weird to explain. But when you're looking at my patterns and you've got one for $12 and you've got one for like 15 or $16 and you
Hmm.
block pattern for $4 over here, but maybe $6 over here,
Yeah.
that just looks chaotic from their end. And well,
Yeah. But you would hope that, like, if it's experienced quilters or people who have some experience with looking at patterns and working with patterns, they can understand by looking at it why. Like, you would you could hope that they would have at least that kind of enough understanding of the time and effort it takes in making those different kinds of patterns, let alone designing those kinds of patterns. And that variance is accounted for. Like, but I think just talking about it and exposing people to the idea that, like, yeah, it does take a lot more time and effort to design this quilt versus this quilt. And that's why this pattern costs more than this pattern, because this pattern only took me 20 hours and this pattern took me 80 hours. It's like whatever the timing is, I don't know, but
Probably 80.
right. So, yeah, how are us as consumers, how can we support the producers of, like, you're producing these patterns for us consumers to be able to make and create our own versions, and if it resonates with us, it's something we can all share together. But, like, yeah, where's that line? Like you said, we keep walking this line of, like, what's fair to you and what's fair to the consumers, and vice versa. Like, how's everybody's values and expectations going to be met in this? So
And luckily, like my livelihood doesn't depend on pattern sales. So I have a bit more, I think two things. I have a bit more leeway and responsibility
mhm,
to charge what I think they're worth. I have leeway because if it doesn't sell because it's too expensive, that's fine. My livelihood doesn't depend on it. I have responsibility because it would be really easy for me to undercut prices because my livelihood doesn't depend on it. But because I have that, I feel even more obligated to charge what it's worth because if I miss out on sales, it doesn't impact me.
sure.
So when I launched the block of the month, like I I think I priced it fairly for my time investment and skills. And I only got one email about the price point of it actually. So for folks who are kind of struggling with what to charge, my advice has been charge what you think it's worth. It's better to have 20 people who participate and agree with you than 30 people who are underpaying you what you're worth.
Mhm. 'Cause then you just feel crappy about yourself.
Yeah.
And then it makes it harder for other people to start charging what they think their work is worth and have a leg to stand on if we all undercut ourselves. 'Cause it's like, well, that person's not charging very much. And this person's complaining about how much I'm charging. So maybe I should. It's like, no, if you valued your work because that's what it means to you, then that's all that matters. Like, quilting is art. And even if you're designing quilt patterns and selling them, that's still your art that you're licensing and you're selling and you're choosing to share with other people. You don't have to. So if they want a piece of it, it costs money. It costs a little bit because you did put time and materials into it and worked through all of it. So I think it's getting better, hopefully. And I think, again, the more we talk about things, the more we expose people to the idea that this is happening out there. It is real for us small business owners. Like, people don't call into question bigger business, right? But it's like we just blindly pay what we pay because we're like, well, that's just the price. But then why is it so different if I'm telling you the price of what my work is worth and you want to question me or it's like not me specifically, but just that idea that people can, like, be like, well, I don't think it's worth that. It's like, then don't freaking buy it. Go somewhere else.
It's not worth that to you. Like
Yeah.
that's totally fair.
Yeah.
Absolutely fair. It's
Yeah.
worth that to me, and I'm the one putting it on the market.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, well, then I'm not your quilter. And that's okay. Go find somebody who is. Like, I'm not gonna be upset that, you know,
I mean, I
not
am really upset because I'm a people pleaser and I'm really but
realistically, I'm gonna go cry, but not in front of you.
uh, I will tell you that is fine. You are welcome to find other quilters.
Yeah. And then I'm gonna go eat my feelings, not myself. I meant to say eat my weight in food to
Yes.
to subdue my feelings, but I can't talk
I'll
apparently.
eat my
So,
weight in ice cream while I recover from that.
right. Oh my gosh, how funny. Well, thank you so much for being here talking with me about your gorgeous quilts. And I'm so excited is it grandma core or granny core?
You know what? I've named it both in my files. I believe I've settled on grandma core.
Grandma core.
I picked that one because Pinterest trending keywords told me grandma was more popular than granny.
Mm,
I
okay.
think that's why I picked that one.
Okay. So grandma core is coming out. Well, by the time this airs, it will be out. So that's exciting. If people haven't gone and checked it out yet, they can go do it. And your block of the month is still available. Wonderful. And you've got some new projects in 2025 that we can look for. So that's exciting. Awesome. And then if people don't know how to get to you online, where can they get to you?
I'm on Instagram at mija.handmade, MIJA.handmade, and my website is mijahandmade.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for being on the show today, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks for having me. It was so nice chatting.